What are my 5 positives and 5 negatives from the 2025 season? I'll tell you in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back with another edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That is at JOHNYJ_15. You also can listen to us on wherever you download your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and YouTube. Just be sure to hit the follow button and subscribe. For you first-time listeners wondering how this channel works, I should probably start telling you how it's going to work in the off-season now that the regular season is over. The Locked On Royals postcast, hosted by Chance Lebo, won't come back until opening day of next year. But as for myself, I will be bringing you 5 episodes a week. If I ever miss a day, I'll be sure to make it up somewhere, either in that same day or later on this weekend. So as you know, didn't get an episode up yesterday. I was still traveling back from my wedding, got back pretty late. And to be honest with you, as I'm sure you could already tell, didn't have much of a voice. So just didn't think I was going to be able to get it done in time. But I'll make it up at some point this weekend. I'll probably do it on Sunday now that I think about it. But moving forward, and before we dive into our 5 positives and 5 negatives, I can confirm that this offseason, unless I'm sick on one of the days, I plan on getting these episodes out in the morning. I know I promised that in the regular season, but sometimes stuff would happen, work stuff would happen, and then I didn't want to record too close to that night, and so it just kind of was up in the air. Now with no games that are occurring, I do plan on getting these out in the morning almost every single day, Monday through Friday. Now, as I said before we get started, one last thing to tell you about it is that our title sponsor is FanDuel. And with FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So download the FanDuel app today. And I do promise that my voice is going to get better as the week goes on. This is usually the way that it goes, but we're going to fight through it and try to give you some of a good recap of this 2025 season, what I saw in a good way, what I saw in a bad way. Let's start things off here with the positives. Now, it was a positive that the Royals finished with a winning record. That's now back-to-back seasons that they got it done. At the end of the day, though, finishing with a winning record in only one game better than finishing 500 was not the goal of this team. If you asked all of those leaders in the clubhouse, that was not what they envisioned when they showed up to spring training in February. When pitchers and catchers were reporting, it was not, we just need to make sure we have a winning season. No, it was definitely trying to get back to October. And quite frankly, it was to win that division and go deep into October. But for a positive, what I will say is that this team did endure many injuries that they just didn't go through in 2024. And for that, I will say the rotation and its depth, really showed up in a big way. I'm not going to rank these 1 through 5. I'm just simply putting out 5 positives, 5 negatives. I was very pleased with the depth of this starting pitching. You had a phenomenal season from Noah Cameron. You had a really good season from Stephen Kolek once he was acquired. You got a phenomenal year until like the final 2 starts of Ryan Bergert. And even though you had to see Rich Hill make some starts, you didn't have Alec Marsh all season long, to be there in September, to be in the hunt, and you didn't have Cole Riggins, you didn't have Chris Bubich, you didn't have Seth Lugo. If I would have told you that in June, you would have thought that team was 30 games under 500 at that point. But some young talent really showed up in a big way, and those are guys that all have multiple years of control. So they're not going anywhere anytime soon unless they were to be entertained in some trade talks. The second positive, I will say, it was the emergence of Maikel Garcia. What Maikel was able to do this year almost cemented his spot over at the hot corner at third base. I wasn't sure if he was ever going to live up to what his batted ball metrics and his defense had shown out there, because when you looked at those metrics and when you looked at how talented he was defensively, you thought that this was a guy that could be one of the best players on your team. But in 2024, despite making the postseason, you just didn't get much from him. Now you feel very confident that Maikel Garcia is a mainstay in this lineup and is probably deserving of an extension. So to have that left side of the infield with Bobby Witt Jr. and Maikel Garcia, that is such a tremendous takeaway to have. And you can make a strong case that this is one of, if not the best defensive left sides of the infield in baseball. Offensively, you know that they are right there too. They didn't really have the power numbers this year, but to find two guys that had 6+ WAR seasons at short and third, not many teams get that luxury. And in fact, the infield as a whole, other than second base, really was phenomenal this year, which leads me to my third positive takeaway. Vinny Pasquantino. He got through an entire season, and he had a 30+ home run year. He had a 100+ RBI season. This is what the Royals always thought Vinny Pasquantino could do. And in the 2 previous years, in fact, I'll go the 3 previous years, there were obviously the flashes, and I don't really want to include 2024 because if he didn't have the thumb injury in Houston, he would have had a 100+ RBI season. But to have a 30+ home run season, now you feel incredibly confident about him being your first baseman of the future as well. So 3 guys on the infield that didn't just have good seasons, they had phenomenal seasons. And what's crazy about this fact as well is Bobby Witt Jr. technically had a down season by his standards, and he hit close to 300 and drove in over 100 and played Gold Glove defense. He is only going to get better, in my opinion, and I would expect him to really make a strong push for the MVP award next season. And I believe a lot of that comes down to what this lineup looks like. You don't want to put everything on his shoulders, and right now the pieces are in place. You just need to add a few more to really make this team a true contender. The fourth positive that I have, the bullpen took a tremendous step forward this year, and they still went through some injuries of their own. Carlos Estevez, I don't want to say was a home run signing, but it was pretty darn close to it. To lead the league in saves, to have a sub-2.7 ERA, to have a below league average whip, to be one of those guys that in the 9th inning, you just knew you could hand him the ball and he was going to find a way to get it done. It wasn't always that way early on in the season, but the numbers aren't going to lie. Going back to January, if you would have said Carlos Estevez was going to be a nice setup man for the Royals, a lot of people would have been on board with it. But the fact that he went out there, was the closer right out of the gates, didn't have a traditional spring training because he had the back flare-up, he was able to go out there and lead the league in saves. That's going to be incredibly tough to top next year, but you also don't have to worry about your closer's role, where going into spring training, I feel that we were all kind of uncertain whether it was going to be Estevez or if it was going to be Ursic. But Estevez won the job, and really I don't think it was true competition because he didn't have a full spring training, and yet the Royals made him the closer. In my opinion, it was because of the money that he was given. Ursic's not making that type of money, and you don't give a 3-year deal to a setup guy. But I thought that Steven Cruz and his emergence was phenomenal. Late in the year, Luinder Avila had some big-time innings that I believe the Royals will take into account when making their roster next spring. Jonathan Bolin impressed me in a lot of ways. Angel Serpa had his moments, but just to have another year where it's not too high, not too low. Angel Serpa is what he is. And truthfully, as I don't even want to say as odd as it sounds, you just want a lot of certainties in the bullpen. Whether that guy is a sub-2 ERA guy or that is a 4.1 ERA guy. You don't want the reliever that can go from a 2.5 ERA to a 6.5, and you just don't know what he's going to look like on any given outing. I thought that Angel Serpa was pretty close to what he was last year, and he's going to be back in this bullpen next year if you were to ask me right now. John Schreiber was John Schreiber. I put him in that same category of Angel Serpa. I don't envision him coming back. I feel the Royals have some confidence in the depth in that bullpen. And we'll see if anybody opens up around spring training where you can have a minor league deal, because for the second straight year, they hit on a minor league deal guy. It was Taylor Clark. Taylor Clark was incredibly effective and much better than his first go-around in Kansas City. He was this year's Sam Long. And now the goal is going to be trying to get, that bullpen on a very even playing field from the bottom half of your bullpen. I feel that you have a solid back three. Next year, it should be Steven Cruz, Lucas Ursic, and Carlos Estevez. But in that middle part, and maybe where Sam Long was, maybe at times where Daniel Lynch was, having more high-powered guys for that spot, look at Cleveland. Look at some of those top bullpens in baseball where they were just a bunch of guys breathing fire. And to get that in your bullpen, that can take it from a top 5, top 7 group where they were to one of the best bullpens, if not the best bullpen in all of baseball. And the last one that I am going to say, it does have to tie back into finishing with a winning record. The Royals did not have a successful season by their standards. But the fact that I can sit here today and say that an 82-80 season did not live up to standards shows you where this foundation is and where it can go from here. I am pumped for the offseason. I can't wait to see what they try to add, and I feel this team is going to be right there in it next year. And this is what a lot of those good teams in the American League did for a number of years, while the Royals were constantly spitting in the mud down at the bottom of the Central and down at the bottom of the American League as a whole. If this team can look at an 82-80 season and say, we feel we're much better than that, that shows you where they're at. Whereas 2 years ago, they walked into the offseason coming off 106 losses. Now, the goal is to right some of the wrongs you had this year and get healthier than you were this year and go for that AL Central crown in 2026. We'll take our first break of the show. When we come back, now let's pivot to the 5 negatives that I had of this 2025 campaign. That's next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. Want to tell you about one of our sponsors today in Nutrafol. You've probably seen a million ads for hair growth products and thought, sure, like that actually works. There's so many products out there, and it's hard to know which ones are actually going to do anything. That's why you should give Nutrafol a closer look. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand, trusted by over 1.5 million people. And now, Nutrafol is the official hair growth partner of Major League Baseball. You can feel great about what you're putting into your body since Nutrafol hair growth supplements are backed by peer-reviewed studies and NSF content certified, the gold standard in third-party certification for supplements. See thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. So don't waste any time and use our code LOCKEDONMLB. We just went through the positives of what we saw in the 2025 season, and now for a lot of you, I'm sure you're eager to know what I thought were the overwhelming negatives of 2025. The first one, I don't believe I need to overthink this. It was the offense. I mean, with what this pitching staff endured, they had all the injuries. They found a way to get depth in that part of this roster, and yet the offense, with a bunch of talent, in my opinion, I thought this offense did have enough talent to compete in October, way back when the season began in March. I thought Jonathan India was going to be much better than he was. Now he's going into the offseason as a non-tender candidate. I did not expect Jack Caglione to struggle as much as he did. I did not expect Michael Massey to struggle as much as he did. But to play off of this struggling offense, you do have to put blame at the feet at what they did in the offseason. And what they did in the offseason was acquire Jonathan India for that lineup, but honestly bet on a lot of guys they shouldn't have been betting on. I mean, their opening day lineup had Kevin Biggio out there because of the platoon splits that Matt Quatrero loves to play. Hunter Renfroe was out there for a chunk of April. MJ Melendez was out there for a chunk of April. And even though the leash was much shorter, Hunter Renfroe was gone after April. MJ Melendez was demoted before April could even come to an end. Then we saw him for a brief stint later on in the year in the second half, and he didn't do anything. But the fact that they were still given roster spots, I feel contributed to that offense getting off to a slow start and then sputtering for the first half of the season. Then they go out there and acquire Adam Frazier. They get Mike Yastrzemski. They get Randall Grichuk. The offense has a pretty good month. And then in September, they torpedoed back down, which eventually led to their demise and falling from 1 game back of a playoff spot to 7 or 8 games back of a playoff spot. This offense has to raise the floor. And that starts with the bench. And that starts also, too, with looking at guys that you don't have 100% confidence in and bouncing back. As I said before on one of my episodes, I'm not asking 3 to 4 guys in that lineup to bounce back. I'm going to ask one of them to. And my hope would be it's Jack Caglione, because I feel his bat has the most upside of any bounce back candidates we may be talking about. You know what a lot of these guys can be, and you know their injury history. And if you roll the dice on 3 or 4 guys in the lineup, well, guess what? I'd imagine you'll see a similar offense to what you saw this year. The second negative that I will say, and that was more so about the offense as a whole, and I'll probably circle back to individuals in that offense, but I'm going to jump over to the pitching staff here. It was a major disappointment for what Seth Lugo did after he signed that extension, because that was when the Royals needed him the most. They had just acquired Ryan Bergert and Steven Kolick, and you knew that Cole Reagans was on track to return later on in September. I should have thrown him in as an honorable mention just to come back and pitch the way that he did, which says a lot about him and his work through that rehab process. But for Lugo, he was your workhorse. Michael Wacha, of course, was your steady hand. But Seth Lugo was a hot commodity at the trade deadline. You decide to extend him, and he throws worse than he ever has in a Royals uniform, which then leads to skipping a start, which then leads to being put on the injured list for the rest of the year. I'm not overwhelmingly concerned with what he's going to look like in 2026, but now it is a very, very important fact to work around that when it gets to August, he's going to trend in the wrong direction unless he has been given some rest early on in the year. He's in his mid-30s, and you can't be asking mid-30s starters to throw 200-plus innings anymore, which is why going into next season, I'm all right if he averages 5 innings an outing but has a sub-3 ERA in the first half of the year. I would like for him to be fresher than he has been in August and September the last 2 years. So he was the second half of Lugo's season, that was a big negative for this team, because that's when you saw this rotation just really scratching and clawing to make its way through the season. And unfortunately, there were just too many injuries to overcome. Now, even though I said Cole Reagans was a positive in coming back, I feel I would be foolish in not saying that Cole Reagans missing a chunk of this season and Chris Bubic missing the entire second half was a gut punch. For the way that Cole Reagans looked last year and to not have that until September of this year, that was really tough to endure. And most teams that don't have their number one pitcher for the entire year aren't playoff teams when it's all said and done. But then you have Chris Bubic light it up in the first half in Reagan's absence that we're even talking on the podcast. And we had multiple commenters say, well, now Chris Bubic is the ace. It's not Reagan's anymore. And the numbers were backing that up. But Chris Bubic also wound up on the injured list, and his season was done. Same injury that Reagan's had in the rotator cuff strain. His just wasn't able to be overcome. His injury was one that happened later than Reagan's did, and there wasn't enough time or games left in the season to get back out there and throw in September. But I still hope that Chris Bubic, assuming he's on the roster and not traded in the offseason, is somebody that can bounce back in a big way. I feel more confident in betting on bounce backs in the rotation and in the bullpen than I really do in this lineup. Number 4, I was wrong more than a few times this season. And one of my worst predictions, one of my worst calls, was saying that the Royals were going to be a winner in that Jonathan India and Brady Singer trade. I thought that Chris Bubic could make up for the production that Brady Singer gave them, which if he continued and didn't get hurt, he would have had a better season than Brady Singer. But what the Royals got from Jonathan India was well below average. I mean, there were so many parts of his game that were glaring issues that it actively hurt that lineup every single day. And then at the deadline, you go out there and get Mike Yastrzemski to hit leadoff for you. And Jonathan India was acquired for that reason, to be your leadoff hitter. The defense was well below average. He wasn't as available. And then at the very end of the year, he wasn't even starting anymore, which is why it leads me to believe that he is going to be a non-tender candidate. And I'm leaning that way because the Royals wouldn't have just put him on the bench the rest of the way. I feel more confident saying they might bring back Adam Frazier over Jonathan India for a cheaper price there and roll with Massey and Adam Frazier, even though those guys are both lefties. But to have that from a guy that you traded away, a homegrown piece coming off a career season, that was tough. That was really tough to see because I was so high on that move in the offseason. Not because I'm high on every move, but you brought in someone who had a top 5 walk rate, who could be one of your best OBP guys, and he turned in one of the worst seasons of his career, not just offensively, but certainly defensively as well. So that's my 4th negative of this season. And then lastly, I would say that for this team, the outfield production, having the year they did for the 2nd straight year, it goes back to that point I made about the offseason and betting on guys and bounce back deals. The Royals should have cut bait with more than a few guys at the end of 2024, considering the way they lost to the Yankees in the ALDS. And this outfield needs to be 90 times better than they were this past season. Some of the guys they were throwing out there in the first half, that's just not going to get it done. If you want to be a legitimate and true contender in the American League, you cannot have the worst outfield production in back-to-back years. I will give credit to Kyle Isbell. I thought he was phenomenal this year for what you expect from him. But in the corners, that was an atrocity. Until you got Mike Yastrzemski, nobody else was really figuring things out there. And you need to have good above league average bats in both of those spots next year. If you don't, you're going to have stretches with this offense like you did in 2025. They need to be hunting on the trade market and in free agency to significantly boost that outfield. But that, to me, was why this offense never could really figure things out. They had the infield production. They had a 30 home run, 100 RBI season from Salvador Perez. Same from Vinny. Career year from Michael. Great year from Bobby Witt Jr., even though it wasn't a career year. And the outfield just brought them down a whole bunch. There wasn't a lot of guys that you could rely on, and that needs to be the focus going into the offseason. What were your positives? What were your negatives on the season? Let us know in the YouTube comments below. When we come back, we'll give you our picks for the 2025 Major League Baseball postseason. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find us on wherever you download your podcast. Want to tell you about our title sponsor today in FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. For my picks, because we are going to be talking about the postseason, I will go for tonight's game, the Boston Red Sox in the Bronx against the Yankees, and then the Reds on the road in LA against the Dodgers. I'm going to take Garrett Crochet over on strikeouts against the Yankees lineup, and I'm also going to take the over on innings for Max Fried. And as for the Dodgers and Reds, I will take Shohei Ohtani to homer in this game. So those are my 3 picks, and I'm going to be doing so over on FanDuel. And now circling back to the afternoon slate in the postseason action, we've got the Tigers on the road in Cleveland. That'll begin at 12:08 p.m. Central Time. The Padres and Cubs will have a first pitch of 2:08 p.m. Central Time. And then it will be, as I said, the Red Sox and Yankees, the nightcap at 5:08, and then the Reds and Dodgers at 8:08. So we'll start it off with this series with Detroit and Cleveland. Detroit had one of the worst collapses you will ever see. The Tigers probably had a 90+% chance of winning that division for 90% of this season. It wasn't until Cleveland had this unbelievable surge, in the same way Detroit had an unbelievable surge last September, that things got close. And then they had 6 head-to-head games at the very end, and Cleveland won 5 of them. That's how dominant Cleveland was. And so now the Guardians, for the 2nd straight year, are the AL Central champions. And the Tigers have to be kicking themselves that they have to go on the road for all 3 games of this postseason series against the team they didn't play well against at the very end. The good news for Detroit, they've got Tarek Skubal, who dominated the Guardians in the postseason until Game 5 of last year. This is a guy that gives them a lot of fits. And still, at the end of the day, it's not a very talented Cleveland lineup. but it's a Cleveland lineup that will get things done. I'm just picking a winner for this series and not so much of today's game. Game 1 goes a long ways, but I feel that Cleveland carries their hot streak into the postseason. Detroit, they have just collapsed, and I have a hard time believing they are going to snap out of it and play some of their best baseball right now. The writing has been on the wall for a while. I'm going with Cleveland to move on to the ALDS. As for the Padres and the Cubs, the Padres I'm very high on. That lineup is loaded. The Cubs, there are some noticeable gaps in that lineup. And looking at these bullpens, I honestly feel this is what's going to decide it. This feels like a wild card series that goes to a third game. But I am going to roll with the Padres here. I feel better about their lineup. Yes, they're going to be on the road in Chicago, but I am going to roll with the Padres here. I'm higher on their lineup. I do feel that game 1 here, you got Nick Pivetta, a 13-game winner, and Matthew Boyd, a 14-game winner. Matthew Boyd, the Royals saw earlier in the season, he was so locked down in that game. Pivetta, though, has just been a little bit better this year. So I feel the Padres are going to get this one. It'll go to a third game, but I am going to roll with San Diego to move on to the NLDS. Going on to the third series here, the Red Sox and the Yankees, and I'll go a little bit quicker now because I got to get through some other series as well. I'm going to take the Yankees. This is the home team, a great rivalry one. It's going to be a phenomenal atmosphere in the Bronx. The Royals got to experience that last year, but there's a lot of firepower. As I said with the Padres, so much firepower in that Yankees lineup. We'll see what Aaron Judge looks like. This is his chance to redeem himself a little bit. And Garrett Crochet versus Judge should be a lot of fun tonight. Overall, though, in the series, I am in a roll with New York. Reds and Dodgers. The Reds feel like last year's Royals team. I tip my cap. Go listen to their podcast as well, the Locked On Reds podcast with Jeff Carr. They're amped up for it, and it should be just a great experience for them. Unfortunately, they get the reigning World Series champs, and I don't have them exiting the postseason this early on in October. Then you get to the next round of the postseason, which would then be Seattle and Cleveland for me. Seattle, they seem almost like the team of destiny. They really do. That lineup got so much better at the deadline. That fan base has been starved. I got them moving on to the ALCS in 2025. As for the NLDS, which in this bracket, the winner of the Cubs and Padres series will go on to play Milwaukee. The Dodgers and Reds will go to take on Philadelphia. For my picks there, I will take Milwaukee to move on to the NLCS over the Padres. I am going to take the Phillies to pull off the upset over the Dodgers, though can't really call it an upset because the Phillies are the 2 and the Dodgers are the 3. You can be the judge of that. But I'll take the Phillies and Brewers to meet in the NLCS. I will take the Mariners and the Blue Jays to meet in the ALCS. I will have the Phillies getting to the World Series, and then I'm going to take the Mariners getting the World Series from the American League side. And in the end, I'm going to take the Philadelphia Phillies to win the World Series. They got so close against the the Astros, an AL West team there. They got so close against the Astros in 2022, got upended by the Diamondbacks in 23, then get upended by the Mets last year. It just almost feels like they're due. And if they get past the Dodgers, I feel confident they can get past the Brewers there. And if they are to meet the Mariners, that is going to be an absolutely phenomenal postseason. I would just have concerns of the Mariners' ability to play on the road in one of the best environments that you will see in October. What are your picks? Let us know in the YouTube comments below. Well, that'll do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I have been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every day. For your second, find the all-night Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, until a World Series champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale and find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about our first free agent target of the offseason. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.